Hey, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. I'm your host, Pedro Loveria. Today, we're going to go over something I find very fascinating, which is a text called the Shigisan Engi, which is a collection of ver three scroll collection of legends attributed to the life of a monk named Myolen, who lived in the 900s in Nara, Japan, on Mount Shigi, apparently, and they were created in the second half of the 1100s, second half of the 12th century. And I find this story fascinating. I learned about it first when I was in college. I took a Japanese art history class. And now, coincidentally, I live in Japan. So, I kind of always retain in my memory kind of what I learned. And because I thought it was so fascinating by itself. But now that I'm super into UFOs and study the whole UFO phenomenon, um, now I find it even more interesting. Just a disclaimer, in no way am I saying that I am going to reveal the true meaning of the Shigisan Engi, right? I'm not saying that, oh, these people thought, it was this, but now a scientifically minded, advanced Westerners know what they were really talking about, what they really saw, because we're past superstition. I'm not saying that at all. Nor am I doing the exact opposite, nor am I saying that the UFO phenomena should be interpreted in terms of Shinto or Buddhism. I'm not saying that either. What I want to do is kind of go through two very interesting stories in the Shigisan Engi and compare them to kind of these tropes in modern ufology and identify a common gestalt that they both share. And I'm not going to try to explain why that exists, but I may give some ideas. But onto the Shigisan Engi, and you'll see why I'm making this video, right? So first of all, these beautiful scrolls, this artwork was made in the second half of the 12th century in Nara, Japan. This is called the Heian period. And I was looking at Jacques Vallée's book, Wonders in the Sky, and apparently it seems like there were UFO sightings in Nara during that time. Now, Jacques Vallée is an amazing researcher, but just keep in mind that these aren't primary sources that I'm sharing with you, right? I'm getting them from his book. So it would be better if I went to an actual library and got the scrolls myself and translated them myself and, provided to them to you, but that's not what I'm doing. Okay, I'm using a secondhand source, actually a third-hand source. The primary source would be better, but take it for what it is. But yeah, so you can pause this if you want to read, but apparently there were UFO sightings in the second half of the 12th century, right? An earthenware vessel in one case and a luminous flying wheel in another. So perhaps that may provide some context for this story that we're about to read. So let's go on with the Shigisan Enki. Now, I think this should just be read on its own for its own beauty because that is what it is. I mean, historians love this kind of stuff because they can see how people dress back then, you know, and yeah, and it's just really cool. I mean, this is like the first ever manga. But basically, the story starts with a flying bowl, right? Not just any bowl; it's a flying alms bowl. And look at how kind of, I don't know, did it create that? Did it create that kind of wedge in the earth? I don't know, but it starts with flying alms bowl. Now, what is an alms bowl, right? Buddhist monks traditionally, and still in many parts of the world, would beg for food, right? That's how they would eat because they don't have jobs. What do? They meditate and teach all day, right? Or they preside over funerals, that sort of thing, do exorcisms, you know, whatever the case may be. So, Buddhist monks are busy seeking enlightenment and teaching and spreading it as well, the teachings. So they beg for food, right? And so there was a monk in the 900s called Mjolnir, which is who the story is about. And the story goes that Mjolnir was so powerful, right? He was actually telekinetic. And so he didn't actually walk around begging for food. He just mentally, moved his bowl, right? And it would just fly around and people would put rice in it and then he'd fly it back, right? Because that's how good he was. Um, but yeah, it starts with this flying bowl, and these people are freaking out. They're like, "We're not giving him any rice." So Mjolnir decided to teach them a lesson, and he used the bowl, as you will see, to pick up the granary. Right? So he's like, "I'm going to teach you guys a lesson." So he uses his flying bowl and he takes the granary, and everyone's freaking out. And the owner of the farm was like, "You can't take my granary." So, he gets on a horse with his friends and they're like, "We're gonna follow that granary." So the flying bull's carrying the granary and they go and they chase it, right? The owner of the farm and his friends. And it's not hard to follow a flying granary, being held up by a flying bull. So they follow it. And of course, just look at how beautiful this is. I mean, this is just beautiful art. I imagine these are cherry blossoms. So they follow it along the very hilly and mountainous terrain that is Japan, and they go follow it back to Mjolin's house. So Mjolin's there, and he tells them, "Okay, I'll give you back your grain." Well, he says, "I won't give you back your granary, but I will give you back your rice," which is interesting. So that's the deal. So they decide to, again, more beautiful scenery. I don't want to pass this up too much. But so they put some rice on the bowl, and then Miolan sends the rice flying back to the original location. So here's some deer, right? Hilly, hilly, hilly land. If you've ever been to Japanese countryside, it's a lot of it, especially where I live. It's a lot of hills. And here they go, the flying, rice sacks, flying the bowl or following the bowl, and they go back to the original location, right? And everyone starts freaking out, and they're happy because the rice has flown back thanks to Yolen. So that's the first story in the Shigisan Engi. Um, and I think it's an interesting story. Um, Again, if we go back to our PowerPoint and kind of ask some interesting questions, right? This this story was written down or depicted artistically at a time of possible UFO flaps, right? One with an earthenware vessel apparently flying around. Um, and I just think it's interesting how the rice sacks are similar to what we call tic tacs, right? They're ovals, right? They're ellipsoids. That's the Lonnie Zamora craft from the 60s. This is a flying oval from the 50s in Germany. And then you have these flying sacks of rice. So, I mean, the question might be asked, right? Were Japanese people during the second half of the 12th century seeing flying ovals? And if so, did they try to find an explanation, right? And it's interesting because nowadays we see flying tic tacs or ovals, and we try to find human explanations like Lockheed Martin or the Chinese. 80 years ago in World War II, the Foo Fighters over Europe, the Allies were seeing while they flew their planes. It was suspected back then that they were actually like secret German technology, but obviously Germany lost the war, and so it seems very unlikely that it was ever secret German technology. But it's interesting. So the question needs to be asked: were people seeing, flying ovals in 12th century Japan, and were they trying to find a human explanation? In this case, a super psychic monk, right? So they see it flying oval, they say, ah, it's a flying rice sack, and obviously, what's moving it? A super psychic monk, right? You also have the issue of the earthenware vessel, right? If people are seeing flying earthenware vessels, again, did they interpret that as a flying alms bowl, right? And did they again guess that, oh, there must be a super telekinetic monk that was moving it? I don't know, right? I think it's interesting though. Um, Here's a second story from the Shigisan Engi, which I think even has more resonance with the UFO phenomenon. Um, Not just the flying houses and flying bowls and flying um, rice sacks, right? But another story from Shigisan Engi, different role, um, tells a story of how the emperor of Japan got ill. What I find interesting, if you ever come to Japan and you go to a Shinto shrine with priests, and you ever watch the rituals, or if you ever see kind of like the royal family's coronation ritual, you can watch it on YouTube. The clothing in the Shinto religion worn by the priests and the temple maidens and the emperor and the empress and all that stuff, it's from the Heian period. So it's so cool just to see that 1,000-year old culture, material culture in action. I love this country. But the story goes that the emperor got sick. Okay, the emperor was sick. People didn't know what to do. And so they said, hey, I know a guy. There's this monk named Myolen who's super powerful, and we can ask him for help. So that's what they did, right? They went on a journey, these people, to get help from the monk named Myolen. And there they go, once again, off to Mount Shigi, right, to find the monk and ask for his help. So there's Myolen. Again, I'm not saying he's a gray, even though he's bald, like a gray, no disrespect intended. But they go to Myolen, the human being, and they ask for his help, and he says, "No worries, I know a guy. I'm going to contact the sword boy, and the sword boy will help the emperor." So the sword boy is kind of like this cherubic figure. Anyways, the imperial workers go back. They're like, "Don't worry, Mjolnir is going to help the emperor. Gonna send the sword boy to help him." And the sword boy, again, who's this kind of like angelic or cherubic figure, he comes flying in on his flying wheel. This is the Dharma wheel, a symbol of Buddhism. And he flies in and he heals the emperor. Okay, he heals him. All right. Um, Another image of the sword boy is found here. Okay, so you know, in a sense, I mean, I'm scrolling and these things are read from right to left, but this image seems to be intended to be read in conjunction with the text in the middle, right? There's a sword boy on his way to help the emperor, and here's the emperor, okay, and he heals him, okay, and then of course, uh, look at this beautiful painting, the birds and the hills and the cherry blossoms. And if you ever go to the Japanese countryside, at least on the island that I live on, I mean, it's a lot of hills, and a lot of it still looks just like this, except with the road maybe going through it. And of course, the clothes have changed. Um, they go back, the imperial workers, the workers in the imperial household, they go back to thank Yolen. And again, just beautiful. It's like watching Lord of the Rings, right? But they have these sprawling landscapes. They tell Miolan what happened, and it's all good, right? Life is beautiful. Yeah, so that's just beautiful art in its own for its own sake that should be appreciated. Um, but again, we're looking for common gestalt shared with the UFO phenomenon or ufology as it's understood today, and certain things are just obvious, okay, and they're real. right? And it doesn't require too much reading into to see them, right? First of all, let's talk about CE5, right? Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. So there are people in the UFO space who, whether it's Chris Bledsoe or Stephen Greer, or the Skywatcher crew, and those who read them and follow them to in the sense of imitating their methods. There's a thing, right? People say they can contact, right, non-human intelligence through psychic means, and when this contact is made, the non-human intelligence appears. Okay, that's a trope, right? In modern ufology, right? That's a claim that a lot of people are making. Okay, and I mean, here it is, right? Mjolnir contacts the Sword Boy, right? And again, the Sword Boy is this metahuman or non-human that's childlike. It's literally a boy, right? And he has his flying wheel. Okay. And it's interesting to note that the wheel is depicted horizontally when he's just kind of cruising, but when he needs to really haul A, it's vertical, right? Again, that harkens back to what Bob Lazar talked about vis-a-vis what he worked on at Area 51. He said that the craft he was told to study, the way it flies, if it's kind of going slow and just kind of chilling, it'll be horizontal, but when it really needs to haul it, it'll go vertical like this and then shoot off in a specific direction. You see that in the gimbal video, right? It's turning, right? So you have this vertical flying wheel and a horizontal flying wheel, right? In connection with a childlike uh, metahuman or non-human. And again, I think that's interesting with when you look at it in connection with what was supposedly being seen in Nara at this time, second half of the 12th century. Flying wheels, luminous flying wheels, earthenware vessels, just like in the Shigisan Enki, um, and healing, right? You go to the free study, which is the largest study ever done on contactees, right? And the close encounter phenomenon. More than 4,000 contactees interviewed through a questionnaire from all over the world. And 50% of them have stated that they or a family member has received a medical healing from a non-human intelligence. Okay. So you have healing here, you have healing here, right? You have a non-human intelligence with flying wheel, both in the UFO phenomenon and in the Shigisan Enki, who heals people. And not only does he heal people, but he can be contacted uh, by someone with, you know, say above average psychic functioning, right? The Shigisan Enki, it's a monk. In modern ufology, it's a contactee or a psionic asset, as they're called by the Skywatcher people. So I find that very fascinating. I mean, how do we explain this? It is Do we look too young to Carl Jung and invoke the collective unconscious, right? That these memes are part of the human psyche, right? And these memes manifest in totally unrelated cultures in different times, because those cultures are human cultures. Is it the case that the UFO contactees in modern times, right, um, are simply telling their story, and that story is the same as UFO contactees in ancient times, right? I don't, that's also a possibility. Or is it a combination of both, right? Is it possible that the Shigisan Enki is a story that you know resists our attempts to label it as fiction or fact, right? We in the West are such binary thinkers, right? It shows in how we created computer code, right? Zeros and ones, and we're the children of Aristotle, right? There's law of the excluded middle. Um, Everything's is either true or false. I mean, I grew up taking Scantron tests all through school, true or false, right? But that's not how the real world works. Stories like this can have historical elements and fictitious elements all at the same time, right? And actually, those are my favorite kinds of stories based on a true story. Those are my favorite kinds of stories because they don't just tell you, they're just not just trying to tell you what happened, they're trying to tell you what it means, right? And what it means is, it's is bigger than the event itself, in my view. And those are my favorite kinds of stories. But it's possible that the Shigisan Enki is that type of thing where you know people in Nara, Japan, in the second half of the 12th century were having close encounter, uh, you know, all kinds from 1 to 5, right? And it's possible that uh, these stories were told as a way to explain them, right? That's a possibility. I'm not saying that's what happened. Um, but yeah, I think the Shigisan Enki is really interesting. And again, I don't think these convergences, I don't call them parallels, I call them convergences because that's what they are, right? You have two completely different civilizations separated by 1,000 years, telling basically the same story that some human beings can contact a non-human intelligence, and that non-human intelligence uh, happens to control flying wheels, and that these non-humans can help people, they can heal people, um, and not only that, um, that some of these flying things aren't just wheels, but they're ovals, um, or houses even, more uh, quadratic shape. I don't know. And that this phenomenon is not just connected to to physical objects, but also psychic abilities, right? As we saw in the first story. So that's that. That's enough for today. As always, I want to remind you that consciousness is not classified. And with that, I bid you good night. Thanks.